The Jazz signed Omer Yurtseven. Who is he? What does he bring to the Jazz? And more. Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm your host, Leif Thulin. Excited to be back with you for this final week before David Locke returns. Honored to be with you as always. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan, a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 Combine, attendee of the Summer League, broadcast assistant and statistician for the Utah Jazz the past 2 seasons, and will be back for year 3. And I'm a lover of geeky numbers, college basketball, and I was uniquely qualified to help you guys through the draft, but now I'm going to navigate you through another process where the Jazz are solidifying their roster in between the Summer League and the regular season. And that's where it'll become useful that I've watched way too much basketball to tell you about Omer Yurtseven. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, what do you think of Omer Yurtseven? All right, in the first segment, I'll talk about the Jazz's newest addition, that's Omer Yurtseven, and explain how he plays, what he brings to the Jazz roster, and more. In the second segment, I'll address the financial implications of signing Yurtseven and how much I anticipate he plays, and maybe how that impacts the likes of some other players on the Utah Jazz. And in the final segment, I'll touch on the latest news regarding the health of the rookies as we finish Summer League sooner, and it's sooner than we know, it'll be training camp. And I'll even touch on a few little accolades that maybe some Jazzmen have received, and maybe some expectations for one of the guys we have slipped under the radar in my coverage on Locked On Jazz for you the last couple of weeks. All right, let's dive right in. Omer Yurtseven was signed by the Utah Jazz. That's the premise right here. And here's the report that broke the news, just reading it word for word. Agent Keith Glass told ESPN that the deal is for 2 years, with the starting salary for the 2023-24 season starting at $2.8 million. Hoop Hype's Michael Scotto reported that for the first season is a partial guarantee, while the second season is non-guaranteed. Yurtseven is a 25-year-old native of Istanbul, Turkey, spent his first 2 seasons with the Miami Heat, and he has a career average of 5.2 points per game, 4.9 rebounds per game, while shooting 53% from the field and 64% from the free throw line. So that's what he's done. But that's backing up Bam Adebayo. But like we talked about in the weeks past when we were talking about Paul Reed, the Jazz will be looking to find a player whose production is good, but it has a limited playing time experience, but not because of, they're young and they're not ready, but because they're backing up someone who blocks their path because they're so good. That's what Bam Adebayo does. That's what Paul Reed was facing with Joel Embiid in front of him. That's important to note that this guy could really be something. He just hasn't been given the chance to be that so far, and his minutes were productive when he has played. Yurtseven made sense to go because Adebayo is phenomenal, and Orlando Robinson balled out for the Heat in the Summer League. I'm going to talk about that later. Excuse me. Orlando Robinson, and it's going to be later in this where I'm going to talk about the Summer League, some winners. He's one of them. I think because he was so good, and they already have Nikola Jovic, that the Heat were willing to say, okay, Yurtseven could be something, but we don't need him as much. And I actually brought that up as someone to go for, as Orlando Robinson for the Jazz, when I was thinking about it, when talking to someone about who could the Jazz go after. And I watched the first Summer League game that the Heat played. I said, wow, this guy looks really good. And I think they prioritized him over Yurtseven, but there was too many players for a limited role, and that's why you had to take advantage of it. So that's something. Robinson and Yurtseven have both played sparsely behind a star center in Bam Adebayo. So who is Yurtseven? Omer Yurtseven. He was in college, was a really good player. Like I said, I watch a ton of college basketball. And in doing so, I've seen Omer Yurtseven numerous times. He played 2 years at NC State, and it was all ACC in 2017, 2018, and sat a year while transferring to Georgetown, where he averaged 16 points, 10 rebounds with a block and a half per game, shooting 53% from the field. He's got a nice kind of crafty, uses his body well. So he's big, he's strong, he gets good position, but I'd say he's craftier more than powerful near the rim, and he's got good touch. And I thought he was a improving shooter in college, and he's become a decent shooter. Something to keep in mind on that note is Yurtseven can stretch the floor. Yurtseven in his limited minutes shot 42.9% from three this last year. His average, his 3-point attempts and 3-point makes is on par with what Kelly Olynyk did, but obviously smaller sample size and slightly ahead of what Ochai Agbaji's was. And he did so at a higher percentage than each of them. But, not enough time to say so. But those are considered good three-point shooters for this roster, so maybe adding another player who can space and shoot and be a big body is something to be happy about. This doesn't mean he's the better player or a better shooter than either Kelly or Ochai, but there is a little reason for optimism on the offensive end with that ability to space the floor and the interior touch that he's shown already. So that's one side of the basketball floor. The other side's defense. Miami was excellent defensively as a team, but Yurtseven isn't a tremendous individual rim protector at the NBA level, nor is he supremely athletic moving his feet. I think he's a fundamental, a smart defender, but he's not someone that I would consider an anchor of a defense. I think he'll be helped by secondary rim protectors a lot when he plays in the second unit, whether that's Taylor Hendricks, who has that really high appeal for that, whether it's John Collins, maybe even Kelly Olynyk. That'll play a factor. Let's see. He played 2 minutes per game in 8 appearances for the Heat this postseason, so obviously not very much. He was more of a substantial part of Miami's rotation in 2021/2022, where he appeared in 56 games, averaging 12.6 minutes per game. And this past season, he just played in 9 NBA games, averaging 9.2 minutes per contest in the limited run. I will acknowledge that I think when you consider Paul Reed was one of these players that the Jazz would go after, and that was a 3-year, $23 million deal, that's far more expensive, but he's a far more proven commodity. Omer Yurtseven, I think there's reason to be optimistic, especially on the offensive side. I think he showcases a lot of skill, but I don't think he's quite on the same par as Paul Reed as a complete player, someone who athletically belongs in the NBA, someone who shoots the ball well despite that not being his calling card. Defensively, really stands out, and he just has less playing time because he's behind Joel Embiid, who won the MVP. That's something I think that favors Reed, and that's why he was worthy of that price tag and why the 76ers match, which I'm not stunned by because I think they want to contend, and keeping a backup center is important in that case. But it is a little bit surprising considering what it meant for their monetary side of the things. Like they had to go into the tax apron to get Paul Reed, and that shows how they value him. And I think honestly, it's probably appropriate evaluation because he's a really good player. Yurtseven to me is serviceable and skilled offensively, but I think this may actually open up the door for Hendricks to play more defensively as a 5 in time as he improves. I think this so far allows that for the Jazz to have a set rotation, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'll save that for the next segment. But basically, I think Yurtseven is going to be a serviceable, skilled offensive big who plays alongside good athletes in the second unit that complement what he does well with what they do well. I'll touch on the rotation, his impact, minutes per game coming up next. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about PrizePicks. When you play PrizePicks, it's really fun. It's straightforward. It's simple. It's really fun. What you do is you place, if you think a player's going to have over or under the projected amount of strikeouts, the amount of touchdowns, the amount of aces in a tennis match. I just watched Carlos Alcaraz win Wimbledon, and if you put the over, if he was going to have more aces than what was the projection, you would have been correct. And that was awesome. It was a 5-set duel. But basically, you pick 2 to 6 players anytime, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people, just you versus the projections. And the projections are sometimes really favorable. Sometimes they have ones where they lower the number, and it favors you if you jump on it early enough. Download the PrizePicks apps or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will match you up to $100. And if you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50 back. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all caps, at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Welcome back into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin with you here for another edition of Locked On Jazz, and the Jazz made a move. They signed Omer Yurtseven. When the Jazz were rumored to go after Paul Reed, here is what I said in reaction to not getting Reed, but I think it stands still to be true when signing Omer Yurtseven. Paul Reed would have been the backup 5 and likely would play 10 to 15 minutes a night behind Walker Kessler, but Olynyk factors into the backup 5 minutes as well, as does John Collins. Do the Jazz find another big? I kind of think yes, as this is the move after getting bigger, to me, indicated longing to be patient with Hendricks. So let me interpret what that means, because I know it's a little bit of gobbledygook. But what it is basically, I thought the Jazz were not going to go into training camp with the roster that they had after not getting Paul Reed. I thought they'd get a center. I listed Orlando Robinson as one. We took the other Heat center. Maybe that's because Robinson's the better player. Maybe. We'll see. But basically that means I think you might get 10 minutes out of Omer Yurtseven. You might see him play alongside Olynyk. Sometimes you'll see Olynyk play the 5. Maybe you'll see John Collins play some backup 5. So he won't be an everyday big-time contributor. But if you're to add up his numbers per game, I think it's going to end up to about 12 minutes per game for the Jazz, as constructed. Why do I say do the Jazz go for another big after not getting Paul Reed when they drafted a guy number 9 in Taylor Hendricks? Because I think they wanted to get bigger, and Hendricks playing the 5 gets you smaller. He's bigger at the 4. He's bigger at the 3. I think he's a 4. But he's that doesn't give you positional size. It may give you versatility, but not positional size. And so that's what Yurtseven does. He gives you positional size and the luxury of playing some of these long athletes, these tremendous, rangy, athletic guys that have varying skill sets around him. And it gives you the capacity to do that and have a big body to protect the rim, even if he's not a true rim protector. I also think this allows the Jazz to be patient with Hendricks rather than rush him into uncomfortable roles early on. So I stand by what I said. And to me, this indicates the Jazz view Yurtseven as a capable backup to occupy a similar role, though he'll play stylistically differently than Paul Reed. Like Paul Reed is an athletic energizer bunny who's going to battle and fight, and he's undersized. Omer Yurtseven's more stable, interior on defense. He's going to stay in there, play drop coverage. Offensively, you might be able to play through him as he's a pretty skilled big, but he can step out, space the floor, set picks, pick and pop, pick and roll. And maybe you'll give him an occasional post-up to punish switches. So where does Hendricks factor in is what many will ask. And I've talked about this before, but I'm gonna address it a little bit because I think it is important in this case. I think he likely has a similar path as Ochai Agbaji, where he splits his time in the G League and the NBA with or without a Reed replacement, is what I had said in my notes as I was trying to indicate, man, I wonder if Paul Reed doesn't go, what changes for Hendricks? Well, I think that replacement happens to be Omer Yurtseven, and whether there's an injury or if it's trade, I think that would make the minutes go up for Taylor Hendricks. But anything else, I just don't see anything early in the season where he's going to get extended run. I think they need to ease him into what his role should be in the NBA because it's a valuable one, but it's hard to play. Be a 3-and-D extraordinaire, someone who's a Swiss Army knife, playing off the ball, really rhythm-based. When you're shooting the basketball, and that's what your appeal is on the basketball court at that point, and you're hardly playing, like now you just got to shoot, and you got to really think about all those shots. It's really stressful. It's hard to be confident. Ochai Agbaji struggled with doing that when he would play. Like he'd get good looks, and then he'd miss early. And then by the end of the year, the game slowed down for him. I think the Jazz are going to use a similar approach with Taylor Hendricks, someone who athletically has all the tools, but he's 19 years old. He wasn't supposed to be a one-and-done pick going to UCF, and he exceeded expectations. He was awesome. He's a tremendous athlete, someone defensively that can be really, really good. But I think in signing Omer Yurtseven, in getting John Collins, Taylor Hendricks' playing time is going to be impacted. That doesn't mean it really impacts his stock as a player. It just makes him develop at a different rate in the limelight. I think he can develop quickly and actually be better year 2, but people won't understand where the development is coming from if he plays a fair amount of games with the Salt Lake Stars, if he plays, sparingly in his time as the 9th pick. Like people will look at that and frown. And maybe it's easier to do after seeing someone like Cam Whitmore dominate and win the Summer League MVP. But I think patience will be important. Let me clarify something, though, about Omer Yurtseven. He's very different from Hendricks, and he's more different from Hendricks than Reed. And Reed and Hendricks are different too. But I think the fact that Hendricks is more different from Yurtseven actually helps him and accelerates his timeline. But Hendricks will still get valuable reps with the ball in the G League, and he'll be on the ball. He'll have a game that's catered to improving his skills, as he's the most important player on that team, which is playing his desired 3-and-D role, secondary rim protection, and he'll get a few more chances on the ball to, smooth his game, get stronger. And a lot of things that like are his negatives are really like, okay, if he can be more smooth with the basketball while dribbling, if he can get stronger, things that happen just over time without much actual basketball development. It's playing a lot. Like you see some of these guys. Johnny Davis was the 10th pick last year, and he was not very good at all. And he was terrible in summer league, and everyone was like, "Wow, that's not very good." And that was myself included. I was very low on him, but he was a 16 per game guy in the summer league. That's just development and playing the G League. Like he played professional basketball for a year and showed he really improved, and then was one of the better players in the summer league. I think Taylor Hendricks is getting a hard rap because he didn't play in the summer league. If he played and played all right, people would be like, "Oh, I'm just going to pick his high flashes and everything." I think it's hard to be fair. But what Omer Yurtseven does is he's an interior scorer who can step out and knock down threes, but he's not a very good athlete by NBA standards. And defensively, he's a drop coverage big with little switchability. That's very different from what Taylor Hendricks is. Taylor Hendricks, like we talked about, is a 3-and-D forward who can protect the rim a little bit, switch on defense, run and shoot. Reed is switchable. He's a rim protector. He can run. He can shoot a little bit, and he's a pick and roll threat as well as a really good athlete. That would have been more redundant, harder for Hendricks to find a way to claim that, hey, I'm worthy of playing, even if I'm young. Yurtseven opens that up. I also think the Jazz are more well equipped in the short run because now they have their roster filled, and it allows them with a roster filled to know what their depth looks like in terms of if they want to make a trade, what the cost benefit analysis would be with a more holistic idea of what the Jazz would be. And the Jazz would have enough substantial contracts to make those trades and still skirt under the tax apron as Yurtseven. It's not a heavy deal whatsoever. He's $2.8 million the first year, but that's less than what Paul Reed would have been. And it's enough to be a significant contract that's worth something. Should they factor in the value of money and how being too far under or too far over hurts the team in regard to the tax apron. The Jazz, in my opinion, now likely stand pat, and they probably could make moves and feel like they have confidence in like, hey, we can make this move. We think we're good enough. But I think they should have confidence in their depth now. And I believe it's likely that they stand pat up until training camp. Confidence in their depth is important, especially with the aspirations the Jazz have. The Jazz want to compete as best they can, but they don't disillusion themselves into believing they're a true contender. And I think having confidence in their depth allows them to put faith forward and play players more freely, not put too much pressure on them, and have belief that they won't be sacrificing too much off the bench. And that's something that I think Yurtseven helps solidify. Coming up next, I'll tell you about some Jazz rookies, how they played in the Summer League. We talked about that, and some latest news on their health. But first, let me tell you about Murdoch Hyundai. Murdoch Hyundai has been in Utah for over 80 years. Talk about longevity and productivity. Murdoch Hyundai's got it. Hyundai is the best car for your money with safety features, bells, whistles, and all their amazing cars for amazing prices. The SUV lineup features unbelievable selection from the Kona to the Tucson. The Tucson I rode in recently, it's wonderful. And the Santa Fe, the Palisade. The Ioniq 5 was named the Motor Trend SUV of the Year by Motor Trend last year, and the new 6 is even better. And I saw it with my own eyes the other day. Unbelievable car. Sleek. It's electric. It looks just like a Porsche, and it just won the World Car of the Year. Talk about racking in the accolades. We're going to talk about some in the Summer League coming up next, but that's tough to beat back-to-back and only getting better. There's 3 locations in Linden, Murray, and Logan, so make sure to go into any of those locations and talk to the wonderful folks at Murdoch Hyundai who've been there for over 80 years, who have the online selection and the expertise in person to help you get a Murdoch Hyundai for you. Welcome back on to Locked On Jazz, and I'm going to tell you about some of the rookies that impressed. They were winners of the Summer League, and also talk about the health of some Jazz rookies and the latest updates. So Keontae George, we'll start there. We talked about him a lot. Played phenomenally. He was averaging 30 a game, 59 points in 2 games, and that's as good as you're going to get. Like he had a 33-10 game, and then he got hurt, and he still played. He only played 2 games only completed 2 games in the Las Vegas Summer League. It was named to the All Summer League team. So he was on that All Summer League team alongside Sam Merrill, Utah State alum, someone who went to Bountiful High School and has been really good. was trying to find his way on some good teams, was on the Bucks for a little bit. He won the thing with the Cavaliers, and he was a large reason why, along with Amoni Bates and Isaiah Mobley, older brother of Evan. And so Sam Merrill was the backcourt mate. And Hunter Tyson from Clemson, interesting player. I saw him at the combine. He went 37th to the Nuggets, and he shot the lights out. The Nuggets seemed to find a way to pick shooters. Julian Strother was also pretty good, went 29th to the Nuggets. Cam Whitmore, who went 20th to the Rockets, was a top 5 talent by most, including myself. Had a drastic slip in the draft due to considerable thoughts about his health, his medicals, his demeanor. Everything's been scrutinized, but Cam Whitmore was the MVP of the Summer League. Really good player. I mean, I'm not surprised because good basketball players play good basketball. I think his skill set's a little less desirable as he's just a scorer who uses bruising athleticism right now, but I think he can develop. I compared him to Miles Bridges mixed with, if you get an absolute peak, maybe a little bit of Jaylen Brown. And so for him to be first team, I'm not surprised whatsoever. And then the other one is the aforementioned Orlando Robinson, who rounds out the starting 5 of the all Summer League team. Orlando Robinson was phenomenal for the Heat and looks like he, because of that, has driven Omer Yurtseven out of town, and the Jazz have Yurtseven. So Keontae George, in my opinion, was probably the best rookie who played a few games, because what Whitmore did was less impressive and less conducive to winning, and less conducive to winning at the NBA level as opposed to winning in the Summer League. What he did in the Summer League is great. He out-athleted a league full of athletes, and he was strong, and he was athletic. He was able to score. I think it does translate. But what Keontae George is, he played the point guard and scored 30 a game with plus assist to turnover and by a good margin. Like, that's really hard to do, really impressive. And I think the tune-ups in Utah, especially that first half I've referenced against the Thunder, where he was playing against NBA caliber guards in Trey Mann, in Jalen Williams, in Jared Butler, some of those type of players, he was able to adapt and learn the game. And that's when I truly believed, hey, look, he's got his head screwed on his shoulders correctly right now. Like, he wants to play point guard and show what he can do as a point guard for the Utah Jazz. Like, that means something. That means something to me. And then he comes out and played well the second half, like balancing point guard and basketball very well, knowing how to play the game. He did that throughout the games in Las Vegas, and he was deservingly on the All-Summer League team. And I thought he was probably the most important and impressive rookie. And I'm not saying that just as a Jazz fan. So that brings me to the rookie news. Keontae George, who I just talked about, did hurt his ankle, but he is not wearing a walking boot. That's a really good sign considering it's only been a few days. It was precautionary. It was his right ankle. It's the same ankle that he hurt at Baylor, which is why it's scary, because you don't want a reoccurring injury. But it sounds like he just tweaked his ankle and he'll be all right. Expect him to tape up before some games. And we'll see if that becomes a bugging issue, and really hope it's not. But it sounds like he's not horribly disturbed by this and should be healthy sooner rather than later. And if he's healthy shortly, I think his trajectory is really sky high, and I don't think this is too much of a deterrent. That brings me to some other rookies who didn't get to play, and I think have gotten an unfair reputation on Jazz Twitter. Taylor Hendricks and Bryce Sensabaugh are not injury prone, like based off just missing these games. Like, it's unfair for people to say, and I've seen that. Some people say they're damaged goods, and that's just not fair to what happened. Like, Taylor Hendricks tweaked his hamstring, and he didn't play in the Jazz workouts, if you guys remember when they were talking about, hey, we never worked out Taylor Hendricks. He was here, he was watching, he was engaged, but he didn't play, and he hurt his hamstring, a soft tissue thing. You don't want to rush that. Bryce Sensabaugh had surgery on a knee that had what's called dead leg at the end of the season at Ohio State. I'm a little more concerned about that and how it impacts his athleticism, which already is not an incredible asset. But I'm not worried about them as a whole as being injury prone and not liking basketball because they're not fighting to play. I think Hendricks and Sensabaugh didn't play, and this has been reported a little bit as well. Hendricks and Sensabaugh just did not have the time to practice and help themselves acclimate to the speed of the game from not playing basketball. Like, neither of these teams made the NCAA tournament. Hendricks may have played some NIT basketball. So let's just say they haven't played since March. In fact, Sensabaugh I know hasn't because he was hurt. That's a long time to not play and then ramp up immediately and play in a high-speed game where athleticism is paramount, and these guys are trying to prove themselves. Like, the Jazz didn't want to rush them into high-speed drills, and if the summer league was a week longer and there was time to practice in this setting, well, either or, they would have played. And that's what I've been hearing from reports. So there's no reason to rush into basketball and game speed and everything when you haven't been able to practice. Like, it makes you look bad, it sets you up for failure, and it also is jeopardizing their health. Not worth it. I expect both of them to be fully ready for training camp and compete for time. And that brings me to my final point. I've talked a lot about how George's path to relevancy early in the season and early in his career is just difficult. Hendricks, I talked about how it's a little circuitous for him to get time with a lot of players in front of him. But I haven't talked about Sensabaugh very much. Like, Hendricks was impacted by Collins, by Yurtseven, by Olynyk staying on board. How was Sensabaugh impacted, and what can I expect from him? In a way, he could use the G League time to develop his body and his athleticism with lower stakes. But at the same time, he may need to play off the ball. Whereas in the G League, he'd likely play on the ball. We know he can score individually, but what the Jazz want to know is how well he can play as a shooting ace two guard with a big body with the capacity to defend wings. And it's harder to tell how well he defends, how good of an athlete he is at the NBA level when he's not playing the NBA. How well can he shoot when the ball's not fed in his hands often? Numbers would suggest he's really good at catch and shoot. But a lot of those things are scripted for him as the top scorer. How will he do when those shots are the only shots you're really getting? Like Ochai Agbaji, I mentioned, sometimes felt like the pressure got to him and he was getting good shots and he had to make the shot to feel like he belonged on the court. And he settled down. He was really good. I think Sensabaugh might be the best shooter in this draft. I would say it was Jordan Hawkins, but you could make a legitimate, statistically backed up claim that Sensabaugh is the best shooter in this class. So is it helpful for him to play in the G League and score and hone that craft? Or is it helpful for him to play sparingly and work on his craft as a shooter, as a supplementary piece who plays 3 and D? And I'm actually very curious to see what his body looks like. I expect him to be lighter than the 235 pounds he played as a freshman at Ohio State. He used his body well. He played some bully ball. He battled. He competed. But I just have a harder time believing that this type of player is going to play at that weight and sap some of the athleticism, especially after hurting his knee. He'll probably be lighter than he was at Ohio State. And I'm curious to see how he plays and what he weighs in at training camp. All righty, that'll do it for me. Thanks for tuning in for Locked On Jazz. With your next listen, check out Locked On NBA Big Board, where Rafael Barlow, Richard Stamen have been doing an awesome job, and I'm joining back on soon to talk about the Summer League from a league-wide perspective, as I am a Jazz fan, but I love basketball, and this is kind of the wheelhouse that I've carved my niche in because I love the NBA, I love college basketball, and I love the NBA draft. So Summer League is something that's really important to me, and I may add some league-wide perspectives in that, along with Richard Stamen and Rafael Barlow. So check that out, and thanks as always to make Locked On Jazz your first listen. That'll do it for me, and as always, I tell you this every time. Let's go, Jazz.